I'm still haunted by the words she whispered that night, the ones that cut deeper than any silence I've ever known. She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with a wealth I could never touch, and said, "You're too simple, Paul. I don't think you can give me the life I deserve." I remember the weight of that sentence, how it hung in the air between us, heavier than the chandeliers above the grand hall. I could hear the faint clink of her diamond bracelet as she turned away, as if it were the final punctuation to everything we had shared. I didn't yell, I didn't beg, I just let the words sink into me, one slow, aching heartbeat at a time. Angela had always been radiant, the kind of woman people stop and stare at. But that night, the beauty I once admired felt like a mirror reflecting my own inadequacy. I had grown up knowing the value of hard work, of simple joys, a modest apartment, a hand-me-down car, late night walks in the park, but none of that seemed to matter. Not when she had lived her life among glittering halls, champagne toasts, and endless privileges. I wanted to hate her, I truly did. But there was something in the quiet dignity of her departure that made it impossible. Instead, I felt a cold, heavy sadness settle over me, a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. I had loved her, not for what she could give me, but for who she seemed to be. And yet, her love, if it had ever been truly mine, was as fragile as crystal, ready to shatter with the faintest touch of reality. I didn't know then that the story wasn't over, that the lesson she would receive, the truth that would quietly unravel her arrogance, was already in motion. And I certainly didn't know that Abel, my father, the man whose wealth eclipsed even Angela's wildest dreams, had been watching, waiting, and quietly preparing to show her something she would never forget. I only knew one thing as I stood there, alone. Life had a strange way of balancing itself, and sometimes the simplest hearts are the ones that endure the storm. I grew up in a small apartment on the edge of the city. My childhood wasn't glamorous, far from it. I remember the peeling paint on the walls, the soft hum of the radiator in winter, and the faint smell of old books mixed with instant coffee. Life was simple, quiet, and honest. My parents taught me the value of hard work and kindness, though they left me too soon. After they passed, I carved out my own path, modest jobs, little savings, and the occasional night dreaming of something more. Angela came into my life like a sunrise I wasn't expecting. She wasn't just beautiful, though everyone would say she was, but she had a charm, a confidence that could fill a room before she even spoke. I met her at a charity gala, a world I barely knew existed. She had arrived in a silver gown that shimmered like liquid light, while I wore a simple suit I had borrowed from my brother. She smiled at me, not with pity, not with judgment, but with curiosity. That curiosity, I would soon learn, was fleeting. We began dating in secret at first, away from the glittering eyes of her social circle. Even then, the contrast between us was impossible to ignore. I would drive our old car to quiet little cafes, the kind where the chairs wobble and the coffee is strong but cheap. Angela would arrive, her designer heels clicking softly on the cobblestone street, a small laugh escaping her lips as she ducked out of the attention of the crowd. I loved those moments. I loved her, even as I felt the invisible wall of difference rising between us. Angela had grown up with everything she could want, and I had grown up learning how to make the most of nothing. Sometimes, late at night, I would watch her drift to sleep in my small apartment, her face soft and serene, and I would feel a strange, aching gratitude. She was here, in my life, and for a while, it felt like love could bridge any gap. Then there was my father, Abel. I had always known him as the quiet, distant figure in our family photographs, a man of immense wealth and influence. The rumor in my social circle was that he owned half the city, that his business deals were whispered about in boardrooms like secret spells. I didn't grow up with him, not really. He had his world, I had mine. But when I introduced him to Angela, I saw something shift in her, a subtle tightening of her smile, a flicker of calculation in her eyes. She was good at reading people, and she knew, instinctively, that meeting him wasn't just a formality. It was a test. I remember the first time we entered his mansion together. The doors were taller than the apartments I had ever lived in, carved with patterns so intricate they seemed alive. The floors gleamed with polished marble, reflecting chandeliers like waterfalls of light. Abel greeted us with a calm presence, a voice smooth yet commanding. He was polite, welcoming, yet there was an unspoken weight in every word, a quiet gravity that made Angela's usual charm falter ever so slightly. I noticed it immediately, the subtle change in her posture, the way she shifted her gaze, the almost imperceptible tension in her smile. For the first time, I saw the real Angela. Confident, yes, but calculating. She wanted to be seen, to shine, and the reflection of Abel's power made her anxious in ways she didn't bother to hide. We spent the evening in the grand dining hall, where silver cutlery caught the candlelight and the aroma of roasted meats filled the air. Angela laughed politely at his jokes, but there was a sharpness behind her laughter, a quiet assessment. I could feel Abel watching not just me, but her. And in that moment, I realized this was no ordinary meeting. My father's world wasn't about money alone. It was about character, about the subtle art of knowing who you truly were. Later that night, as we drove home, I tried to speak, to connect, to share the awe I felt. But Angela was quiet, distant. Her fingers traced patterns on the leather of the car seat, and I knew she was thinking not about me, but about the power she wanted to possess, the place she wanted to claim. The love I had believed was mutual began to feel fragile, almost like a candle flickering against a draft. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to turn away. I couldn't stop loving her, even as I sensed the storm gathering quietly behind her polite smile. She wanted more than I could give. Not in money, not in luxury, not even in dreams. And I was too simple. But simplicity has its own strength. And sometimes, the strongest lessons come quietly, without shouting or spectacle. My father knew this. I didn't know it yet, but Angela's lesson was already unfolding in ways she could never anticipate. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Angela's charm had always been effortless, but now it felt like it was measured, calculated, designed to impress and not to connect. I noticed it in the way she corrected my small mistakes, the way she compared my modest life to hers with a faint, almost polite disapproval. "I don't think people really live like this," she said one evening, glancing around my small apartment. Her eyes swept over the chipped table, the uneven curtains, and the worn sofa as if it were an exhibit. I smiled faintly, hoping to hide the sting. "It's simple," she added softly. "Simple." The word lingered, soft but sharp, like a needle pressed gently against my chest. I tried to ignore it. I told myself she was stressed, tired from her world of events, parties, and endless expectations. But the more time we spent together, the more the subtle criticisms grew. She would talk about vacations I could never afford, restaurants I'd never heard of, clothes I could never dream of wearing. And though I loved her, I began to feel small, as if my life, my efforts, my dreams weren't enough. The first real crack appeared during a dinner at a rooftop restaurant. The city light stretched beneath us like a river of stars. I had saved for weeks to take her here. I thought the night would feel magical. Angela, however, seemed distracted. She sipped her wine slowly, her eyes scanning the crowd, her fingers tapping lightly against the stem of her glass. "You know," she said finally, her voice soft but distant, "I think you need to see the world differently. It's bigger than this." I wanted to argue, to tell her that life wasn't about grandeur, that the moments we shared mattered more than sparkling lights and expensive wine. But something in her tone silenced me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was disappointment, a quiet judgment I couldn't reach. As weeks passed, her comments became more pointed. "Paul, I just don't think you understand what's at stake in my life," she said one afternoon, brushing her hair behind her ear with a practiced flick. "You're too simple, too comfortable with small things." I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to ask her if love wasn't enough, if honesty, loyalty, and devotion didn't count for anything. But I knew the words would fall flat. She didn't want comfort or simplicity. She wanted sophistication, influence, and a reflection of her own wealth. I began to notice the subtle differences between us in everything we did. While I found joy in quiet walks and late-night talks, she craved attention, elegance, and spectacle. While I counted on hard work and patience, she counted on status and approval. Our worlds, once touching, were now diverging like rivers pulling away from each other. And then there was Abel. I hadn't realized how much his presence affected Angela until that one evening at a charity gala. Abel was calm, almost invisible in the crowd, yet he commanded a gravity that made people defer without noticing. Angela's smile faltered when she saw him across the room. She attempted to mask it, of course, but her subtle adjustments, the slight stiffening of her posture, revealed a calculation I hadn't seen before. Abel didn't speak to her that night, not more than necessary. Yet every glance, every measured step, every quiet word he offered seemed to test her, and she knew it. I could see it in the way she tried harder, laughed more, adjusted her words, hoping to impress, to belong. But Abel didn't reward charm. He only recognized substance. I tried to defend her in my own mind. Maybe she's stressed. Maybe this is just her way of dealing with pressure. I told myself these stories as if they could soften the growing unease in my heart. But the truth was creeping closer, wrapped in polite words and soft laughter. Angela's love, I realized, was conditional. It depended not on who I was, but on how well I fit into her vision of the world. The final straw came on a rainy evening when she returned from an event, dripping with water, her hair clinging to her face. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, a faint irritation in her eyes. "Paul," she said softly, almost carefully, "I don't think we're compatible. You're too simple for the life I want. I can't do this anymore." I remember the quietness of that moment, the way the rain tapped against the window like soft fingers, the way the light from the kitchen lamp fell in a golden pool on the table between us. I didn't yell, I didn't beg. I simply nodded, the words lodging in my throat, heavy and unspoken. "I understand," I whispered. And that was it. She left. Not with anger, not with drama, just with that polite, clinical detachment that had become her hallmark. The door closed behind her, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. I sat at that small kitchen table long after the rain stopped, listening to the city hum outside, feeling hollow and strangely aware that the world I loved had been quietly rejected by someone I trusted. It was in that emptiness that Abel appeared, not as a father, not as a savior, but as a quiet observer. He had seen Angela's pride, her calculation, her impatience with life's simplicity, and he had begun his own careful, silent lesson, a lesson that would reveal itself in subtle, inevitable ways. In the days that followed, Angela tried to mask her discomfort when we crossed paths at social gatherings. She smiled, laughed, complimented people, but there was a tension, a quiet unease beneath the surface. I noticed it and felt no joy, only a bittersweet understanding. Love could not force growth, nor could it mend arrogance. And Abel, I sensed, had already begun to show her something she could not buy, borrow, or charm her way through. Even as I tried to move forward, a strange calm settled over me. The heartbreak was sharp, yes, but it was not the end. Angela's lessons were unfolding silently, invisibly, and I felt a quiet patience inside me. A strength rooted not in wealth, but in resilience, honesty, and the kind of simplicity she could never understand. I didn't yet know the full measure of the lesson, but I could feel it coming, like a slow dawn breaking over the horizon. And deep down I understood that, when it arrived, Angela would remember not just my simplicity, but her own failings, the pride she could not hide, and the quiet power of a heart that knew its own worth. I didn't fully understand it at first. How quietly Abel could control a room, a situation, even a person's perception of themselves. He didn't shout. He didn't humiliate. He moved through life like a shadow, calm, deliberate, almost invisible, but his presence carried a weight that made even the proud stumble. Angela would soon learn this. It began on a bright Sunday morning, the kind where the sunlight spills into the grand hall like golden silk. Abel had invited us both to his estate, under the pretense of brunch, a casual family gathering. He said, nothing formal, but I knew him well enough to sense the quiet undercurrent of strategy. There was always a purpose in his invitations, a reason behind every smile and handshake. Angela arrived in her usual perfection, a cream dress that hugged her silhouette, her hair cascading like a river, heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She carried her charm like armor, her smile flawless. She didn't see me in that moment. She only saw the opportunity to impress my father, to demonstrate her worth. Abel greeted us both with a calm nod, his eyes sharp yet unreadable. "Angela," he said, voice smooth and even, "it's good to see you again." There was no warmth, no praise. Just observation, the kind that weighs a person without them knowing it. The brunch was simple, elegant, and deliberately intimate. Only a few people, all of whom Abel trusted completely, were present. Angela tried, as always, to shine. She spoke of travels, of art exhibitions, of charitable projects, her voice polished and practiced. I noticed how she glanced at Abel often, as if seeking validation. but he offered nothing beyond polite acknowledgement. It was in the quiet moments, however, that Abel began his subtle lesson. He spoke to her about values, not wealth, about patience, humility, and the importance of seeing people beyond appearances. At first, Angela smiled politely, nodded, laughed at the right times. But as the conversation deepened, the edges of her composure began to fray. "You see," Angela, Abel said softly, almost conversationally, "life is measured not by how high we climb, but by the foundation we stand upon. Some people have everything in the world and nothing at all. And others have little, yet their worth cannot be measured by coin or title." I could see Angela's smile tighten. She tried to maintain it, tried to redirect the conversation, but Abel didn't falter. His words were calm, almost gentle, yet every sentence was a mirror reflecting what she had tried to hide: impatience, entitlement, and pride. Later, he invited her to tour the estate's art gallery, a private collection few had ever seen. Paintings from masters, sculptures hidden in secret rooms, antiques older than she could imagine. He watched her as she moved through the space, noting every glance, every gesture. She commented on the beauty, the rarity, the value. Yet Abel's questions weren't about price. They were about understanding, about insight, about whether she could see beyond surface appearances. "Angela," he asked softly, stopping before a centuries-old painting of a simple family scene, "what do you feel here?" She looked at it, hesitated, then gave the answer she thought he wanted. "It's beautiful, timeless, a reflection of wealth and culture." Abel nodded slowly. "Or perhaps it's a reflection of life lived with care, with love, with respect for small moments. Sometimes the simplest hearts leave the greatest mark." Her smile faltered, ever so slightly. And I saw it the flicker of realization that not everything could be won with beauty, charm, or wealth. That some lessons were quiet but undeniable. The most decisive moment came when Abel asked her to join him in the study, a room lined with books and windows that framed the estate's sprawling gardens. He didn't scold. He didn't accuse. He merely invited. "Angela," he said calmly, "you've met Paul, yes? And you know what he's endured, what he's built, and the life he's led with honesty. Tell me, why do you think someone like him is too simple for you?" Angela's eyes flickered to mine, then back to Abel. Her usual confidence wavered under his quiet scrutiny. She tried to answer, but words tangled in her throat. She realized, slowly, painfully, that charm alone could not compensate for arrogance, that her judgment of simplicity as inferiority was not only unkind, but short-sighted. Abel didn't press. He simply let her sit with the weight of her own assumptions. And slowly, the walls she had built around herself, the carefully crafted mask of wealth and sophistication, began to crumble. I watched quietly, my heart neither jubilant nor vengeful. This was not my lesson to deliver. This was life itself, guided by a man who understood the quiet strength of humility and patience. Over the next few hours, Abel continued subtly. He invited her to observe how Paul interacted with the staff, how he treated those who had nothing to offer him but respect. He asked questions that required reflection, insight, and empathy, qualities Angela had always overlooked in her pursuit of status. She began to falter. Her laughter came less easily, her charm less controlled. I could see the quiet panic beneath the surface, a realization that the life she valued so highly, felt recognition, admiration, was empty without understanding, without heart, without connection. Abel never said, "You were wrong." He didn't need to. His calm presence, the gentle illumination of her own flaws, was enough. And in that quiet reckoning, I felt a strange peace, not because I reveled in her discomfort, but because truth had a way of emerging, even without drama or anger. Angela's arrogance, her assumption that simplicity equated to inadequacy, was being dismantled softly, deliberately, by someone far wiser than either of us. By the end of the day, Angela's posture had changed. Her smile was subdued, her laughter more reflective. She looked at Paul not with the impatience she once had, but with a dawning awareness of what she had overlooked. I walked beside her as we left the estate, rain softly beginning to fall. She didn't speak much, and I didn't either. There was no need. In her silence, I could sense the slow work of self-reflection. She had begun to understand, not in words, not in confrontation, but in the quiet, undeniable weight of realization that wealth and beauty cannot measure worth, and that pride often blinds even the most talented. Abel's lesson, delivered without a raised voice or accusation, had taken root, and in that gentle reckoning, I saw not only Angela's emerging humility, but also the quiet endurance of the heart that had always mattered most. The days after that brunch felt strangely quiet. Angela's usual energy, her calculated charm, had softened almost imperceptibly. She smiled less, laughed less, and when she spoke, there was a hesitation, a thoughtfulness I had never seen before. It was not dramatic, not the kind of sudden revelation one reads about in novels, but a gentle, undeniable shift. I noticed it first during a casual walk through the park. The air was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot, sunlight streaming in golden slants between the trees. Angela walked beside me, her heels replaced by simple flats. She didn't talk much, and I didn't rush to fill the silence. There was a strange comfort in the quiet between us, as if we were both observing the change unfolding, waiting for it to settle. I didn't realize, she said finally, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I didn't realize what simplicity really meant. I looked at her, curious, cautious. What do you mean? She paused, staring at the fallen leaves. I always thought life was about appearances, about being admired, being envied. I didn't see that the little things, the honesty, the effort, the patience, they matter more than anything I've ever known. I nodded, quietly. There was no anger in me, no rush to correct or judge. Her acknowledgement, however quiet, was enough. It was a start. Over the following weeks, I began to notice subtle changes in her behavior. She complimented my modest home without a hint of condescension. She listened more and spoke less about grand plans or extravagant lifestyles. And though she didn't fully let go of her pride, there was a gentle humility now, a recognition that the world I had lived in, small though it was, held truths money could never buy. Abel, of course, observed all of this with the same quiet wisdom he had demonstrated from the start. He never spoke to me about it, never praised or scolded. He simply allowed the lesson to unfold naturally, trusting that time and reflection would shape Angela more effectively than confrontation ever could. One afternoon, we met at the estate again, this time for a small gathering with Abel and a few close family friends. Angela moved through the rooms differently now. She spoke with care, laughed with sincerity, and, most importantly, she seemed to notice Paul not as a reflection of her own desires, but as a person in his own right. At one point, Abel led us to the estate gardens, a vast expanse of manicured greenery, fountains and quiet corners where the sunlight fell in perfect beams. Angela walked beside me in silence for a moment, then stopped, looking out at a small pond. "Paul," she said softly, almost afraid of the words, I think I judged you too quickly. I thought I needed someone like me, someone complex, ambitious, glamorous, but you have something I've never understood before. Strength, patience, realness." I didn't answer immediately. I simply watched her, the wind moving her hair gently, the sunlight catching her eyes. Finally, I said, "It's okay. I understand why you felt that way. We all have to learn in our own time." Her eyes flickered toward Abel, and I could see the acknowledgement there, silent, unspoken, but clear. She had realized that her pride had blinded her, and that humility was the true mark of character. Days turned into weeks, and Angela's transformation continued quietly. She didn't seek to reclaim me or demand forgiveness. She simply began to understand, slowly, that the world she had chased, the glittering balls, the admiration, the status meant little without heart, empathy, and authenticity. I found myself growing calmer too. The hurt, the sharp pangs of heartbreak, had softened into something deeper, a quiet resilience. I had loved Angela honestly, and though she had faltered, I had endured. I had remained true to myself, and in that endurance, I discovered a strength that no loss could take from me. Abel never needed to intervene directly. His quiet guidance, his subtle orchestration of lessons, had done what words could not. Angela had faced her own reflection, and in doing so, had begun to understand the truth she had tried to ignore. Wealth, beauty, and status cannot measure the worth of love, nor can they grant the humility or insight that life's trials teach. There was a delicate moment one evening when Angela returned to the estate for a small dinner. She approached me quietly, her eyes reflecting something I hadn't seen before. Acknowledgement and a hint of regret. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Not dramatically, not as if pleading, but as if confessing to herself. I judged too quickly. I was blinded by what I thought mattered. I see now. I was wrong. I placed a hand gently on hers. It's all right. What matters is that you understand now. She nodded, a soft smile forming, fragile but genuine. And in that silence, I realized something profound. The lesson wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about awareness, humility, and the quiet power of integrity. Abel had known this all along. He had never needed to raise his voice. His calm, deliberate wisdom had guided her toward recognition, and in doing so, had revealed the quiet strength of a simple, honest heart. From that day forward, the world between us shifted not back to what it had been, but to something new, unspoken, yet understood. Angela no longer tried to impress me, nor I her. We existed in the quiet space between pride and humility, between wealth and simplicity, learning from each other in ways that no grand gesture could teach. And sometimes, late at night, when the city lights shimmered through my modest apartment window, I would reflect on that time. On Angela's pride, Abel's quiet orchestration, and my own endurance. I would remember the lessons of patience, humility, and the subtle power of living honestly. In the end, it wasn't about wealth, status, or grandeur. It was about heart, about simplicity that withstands the storm, about lessons that unfold quietly, and about understanding that love, in its truest form, cannot be bought, measured, or forced. It can only be felt, patiently and sincerely, in the hearts of those who are willing to see. Looking back now, I realize how quietly everything had shifted. Angela had learned her lesson, not with anger or confrontation, but with introspection, reflection, and that subtle, unspoken guidance only my father could give. And I had discovered something equally profound: the strength of endurance, the dignity in simplicity, and the quiet power of a heart that remains true even when tested. It wasn't about revenge. There was no need for it. Life has its own way of balancing things, a rhythm far older and wiser than our desires for retribution. Abel had taught Angela without raising his voice. He had shown her, gently but firmly, that arrogance and pride cannot hide ignorance, and that a life measured only in wealth is hollow without humility. And she had felt it, slowly, quietly, until the truth could no longer be denied. I sometimes wonder what she thinks now, when she recalls those moments: the grand hall, the estate gardens, the soft conversations that cut deeper than any confrontation could. I imagine a faint pang of regret, a quiet awareness of her own shortcomings, and perhaps a little understanding of what she had overlooked: that simplicity. Honesty and patience carry a weight that cannot be bought or imitated. As for me, I carry no bitterness. The heartbreak, the pain, and the disappointment have softened into gratitude. I am grateful for the lessons, for the endurance, and for the chance to see people and life with clarity. I understand now that love is not a transaction, nor is it a reflection of status or beauty. True love is patient, quiet, and enduring. It does not demand grandeur. It requires honesty, empathy, and respect. Abel's influence lingered like a gentle echo, a reminder that wisdom often speaks in silence, and that the most profound lessons are rarely loud or dramatic. It is in subtlety, in patience, in quiet observation, that people often learn the most about themselves. Angela had learned this truth, and so had I, though perhaps in different ways. Sometimes I find myself walking alone through the city streets, the night calm, and lights shimmering like stars scattered across the asphalt. I think of Angela, not with anger or longing, but with a soft reflection on impermanence, on pride, and on the lessons life gives us when we least expect them. I think of my father, whose quiet strength shaped the course of events without ever asking for recognition. And I think of myself, grounded in simplicity, in patience, in a love that endures quietly, without spectacle, without demand. In the end, the world keeps turning, people keep learning, and hearts keep enduring. And sometimes, the simplest hearts carry the greatest strength. And so, I carry this truth with me. Wealth cannot measure the worth of love. Beauty cannot guarantee understanding, and pride cannot outlast humility. Life teaches us in whispers, not shouts, and it is those whispers, the quiet, subtle lessons, that remain etched in the heart long after the noise has faded. Because in the end, the most enduring power is not money, not status, not charmed, but the quiet strength of simplicity, honesty, and a heart that knows its own worth. And that, perhaps, is the lesson Angela learned, the one I will carry forever.